All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this social emotional learning and building community session. I'm Lauren Swissman. I'm one of the technology and innovation coaches, and I'll be presenting on this topic today with Amy Fosak.
Morning.
If you haven't had a chance to already, take notice of the link in the bottom of the slide. It is a bit.ly link. If you type in bit.ly/Poway community, and that's all lowercase, you'll have access to today's slide deck. This link will be on the top of every single slide. So if you don't access it now, you can always check the top of the slide for this link. A few things to go over before we get started today. This is a 1-hour training. So that includes this webinar, time for questions, and then the remainder of that hour is expected to be work time on this topic. If you have questions during the webinar regarding today's topic, please use that chat feature. It should be in the bottom right corner of your screen if you click chat. We want to do our best to make sure that we're chatting about and asking questions related to today's topic so we can make sure they're relevant to everyone. If you have something specific to you, please feel free to email edtech@powayusd.com so that we can help you with that specific question after this presentation. Also, we'll be recording this today. We will have this up on the Canva link where you found today's Zoom link within 48 hours of this session. So we just have time to edit it, create a link, and add it to that Canva. So if you'd like to watch this after it's over, if you missed anything and you want to go back, you can do so. Or if you want to share it with a colleague who's not able to be here today, that link will be there shortly. Lastly, we are constantly updating our PUSD digital teaching resources site. That link is in there if you'd like to click it from this slide. We are constantly updating it. It is the same website that we used in the spring to share out many digital resources. We'll continue to use that site this fall to make sure that we're sharing out the most relevant information and tutorials around tools that we're using. All right, let's go ahead and go over today's agenda. We're going to start with some community building ideas, then some ways to establish teacher and student relationships, and then end with SEL and instruction ideas for you to do in your virtual classroom.
We saw this quote from George Couros, and we thought we should start with it because it really speaks to everything we're doing right now, right? And he says, here's the best advice that he can give. And it's really focusing on that connection, excuse me, the connection first, right? And then put everything at a distant second, because we know if students aren't able to connect and feel connected and grounded within the classroom, they're not able to take in that new learning and absorb everything you're trying to teach them, right? So it's really about building those relationships with our students. And how can we take those great strategies that we do in our classrooms, right, when we're making those connections at the beginning of the school year, and really start to transfer them virtually, right? We know it's not going to look exactly the same, and the task looks a little bit different. So how can we do that? So we're going to go over and share some strategies with you. We also put a link to George's podcast for those of you who are interested. Again, he was our featured speaker last year at the kickoff. And he has some, great advice for teachers as we navigate this new teaching environment. We put in here a weekly connection checklist, and this is something for you to just refer back to when you're planning out your week. Again, when we're giving you this checklist, we're not saying go through it and make sure you check every single box. It's just something to be mindful of when you're looking at how are you connecting with your students. Okay, so the first bucket is really, can your students see you and hear you? So are you providing video messages, greetings? Are you doing Flipgrids with video intros? Are you doing live recorded lessons? So really making that connection with them in an asynchronous format. So not just, again, focusing on the academics, but what are you doing in terms of building that social emotional piece and community building? The next piece is giving your students a chance to see and hear from one another. So how are your students connecting beyond the academics, right? What strategies are you using to really build their relationships between one another? So that could be responding to each other on Flipgrid when you're asking a poll question, such as, what's your favorite sport? Really humanizing that classroom experience, because they're struggling too with making connections with their peers, especially their new peers in their classes, because it's in that virtual setting. So again, ensuring that you are giving students that opportunity to see and hear and connect with one another. And finally, individual or small group check-ins. So on that weekly basis, how are you connecting with students on an individual or small group basis? So does that mean you're sending a video message? Maybe you're just sending them a quick phone call or a postcard, letter, email, or you're just pulling them in a small group Zoom where you're really connecting with them and really getting to know them on a personal level and not just focusing on that academic piece.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move into our community building portion of today's session. We're going to go ahead and start with some structured ideas and examples. So you've probably seen on Twitter or Instagram or shared between colleagues, there are so many ideas floating around about how we can create structures for classroom community building. The first one we're going to share with you is some Zoom chat time in breakout rooms. So there's natural talking points in our classroom when we're lining up to start the day, when we're on our way to lunch, while the teacher's loading a video on the screen, right? There are natural chat and talk times in the classroom that we lose out on when we're in a virtual classroom. So how can we kind of build those chat times in for students to build those relationships, and also for us to be talking with them as well? So sometimes it's helpful for students to have that structured chat time. So maybe you ask them to log on in the morning to Zoom at 8 a.m. and then maybe there's chat time in breakout rooms, or there's a Flipgrid that you post so that students can see each other's faces and discuss with each other in the morning. So kind of building in that discussion time for students, allowing them to kind of build their relationships and continue to build that classroom community. Another thing that we see a lot still happening in the virtual classrooms are those morning meetings, right? We know how valuable these are in our classrooms when we start our day off on the right foot. You can see in this picture right in the middle of the screen, a teacher has posted her virtual morning meeting, and she starts her classroom with this every day. She goes over the schedule, she has a morning message, and she puts a bit of her personality in there as well to make sure that she's connecting with her students. So we can continue holding those morning meetings, just moving them over to a virtual setting. Another way to continue to build classroom community is having theme weeks and days, right? We know we have spirit weeks in school, in our classrooms. We might have a pajama day, a movie day, whatever it might be. How can we continue moving that over? So, and you can see in the picture on the right, this school hosted several virtual theme days throughout a week. So wear your sunglasses day, show us what you're reading day, post a picture of that, school spirit day, wear your school shirt in Zoom today. So continuing those things again that we did in our schools and our classrooms before, just moving it over into that virtual setting. Another great structured idea for community building is hosting discussion boards. The Canvas discussion board is a great feature of Canvas, allowing you to post a daily question. Maybe what did you eat for breakfast today? What are you doing after school today? What did you do this weekend, right? Those things that you might ask students as they're walking into the classroom in the morning, that's what we can use the discussion boards for as well. And students can post on discussion boards videos of themselves, texts, pictures, links to websites. So they might take a picture of what they did over the weekend and share that on there. So having those structured discussion boards gives students a place to share that bit about themselves. Lastly, don't reinvent the wheel, right? We know we all have things in our classroom that we love doing year after year, or things that we found that we want to try this year. Don't reinvent it. Use what you've been doing in your physical classroom and move it over to the virtual classroom. I Googled virtual bucket fillers, and there were so many ideas that came up for how we can do virtual bucket filters in our virtual classrooms, right? You might have them message each other or make a Flipgrid community where they're sending each other bucket fillers, right? Take what you've been using in your classroom and find ways to move it over virtually, because we know that it works with students. Students are familiar with it, and it'll continue building community even in that virtual setting. So those were more structured ideas. This one here is more about social Zoom call ideas. So some things that we've seen floating around out there, a show and tell, right? So maybe for a morning meeting or during lunch one day, social emotional time, how can we have students bring in their home lives to share with the rest of the class on screen, things that they're proud of. Maybe you had them do an art activity at home and you want them to share that. So again, time to have that social connection with their peers and classmates. Another thing we've been seeing going around is read alouds and guest readers. Maybe you had a mystery reader in your classroom. Continue to do that in your virtual classroom. Have parents sign up to read to other students over Zoom. And it's another way for them to connect with their classmates. Some other ideas are scavenger hunts and lunch bunches, right? We know students always love that lunchtime with their teacher. You can just have that Zoom on during your lunch hour and invite small groups of students, and having that open social time is really helpful for building your relationship with students, but also their relationships with each other. Lastly, the last resource here is the Go Noodle, and we absolutely love what Go Noodle has been doing during this time of COVID. They have so many resources out there that work over Zoom, virtual dance parties, virtual meditation breaks, virtual movement games. There's all sorts of things on there for all different grade levels and needs for your students. So that maybe even before you start a lesson, that's something that you do with your students to make sure that they're ready and set to learn. Lastly, Zoom games. There's so many games ideas out there. I especially love this one that I found on Twitter from a teacher named Christina Perkins. And what she did was, she's a big fan of Masked Singer. I'm not sure if you've seen that show, but she knew that her students love it. So she made a teacher edition of it on Flipgrid. The teachers sang on Flipgrid and covered their faces, and then students had to guess who it was singing. So again, we know that you're so wonderful at connecting with your students, finding their interests, finding their hobbies, and then finding ways to make that virtual is that next step to continue building those relationships. Some other easy game ideas, especially in that beginning of the school year where everyone's kind of getting to know each other, playing Would You Rather, Boggle, Pictionary, 20 questions, talent shows, where students can showcase their maybe something they learned over this time at home, sing-alongs, and then the tool Kahoot is a wonderful tool. It can be used educationally or just socially, but you can ask students questions, and it gives it a fun interactive way to either review content or just have fun with each other. If you're looking for more game ideas, you can click the more word on this slide, and there's a ton of game ideas to do over Zoom on that website.
So we're going to go now into the teacher-student piece. So I'm going to take over the screen from Lauren. While I'm doing this, if you look in the chat, I think it was Margaret who posted a link to the Responsive Classroom morning meeting book. So for those of you who are not familiar with the morning meeting book, it gives you an idea, it gives you ideas for activities that you can do to really build that community with your students. And a lot of those activities can be transferred into the virtual setting. So if you're needing ideas, wanting to mix it up, that would be an excellent resource to go to. So thank you, Margaret, for posting that in there. So we're going to be looking at the teacher-student piece. Okay. So we're going to look specifically at daily, weekly check-ins. So what does that look like? So one option would be to send out a Google form at the end of the week to your student that just ask them questions like, how'd your week go? What was the best part of your week? Was there something you struggled with? Again, this is personal between you and the student, so you can really get an idea of who you really need to check in on maybe extra that week, because maybe they had a tough week, right? Or who had something to celebrate, and you can connect with them and celebrate and start building that relationship. Another option we have here is doing it through a Google slide. So you could just pop it up, and as part of the first thing students do in the morning is, how are you feeling today, right? And why are you feeling this way? So it gives you that daily quick check-in that students can do right when you begin your morning meeting. When, just as a reminder, I know Lauren mentioned it earlier, but when you have access to the slide deck, we have linked everything in here. So if you click on our Google form, it will take you to that Google form that's on the screen so that you can make a copy and use it, as well as with the Google Slides and the other resources in here. So these are just two different ideas of ways that you can connect with your students on a weekly and daily basis, would be using the Google form or Google Slide option. Okay. Now we're going to look more specifically at SEL instruction. So this is a CASEL model that they've put out, and it really focuses in on social and emotional learning and what are the big pillars. So if we look at in the second circle, you can see it identifies 5 different big bucket areas when we're instructing around social and emotional learning. Self-awareness, right? Self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So thinking of the teacher lens of how can I make sure I'm hitting those buckets, all of them on a regular basis, and not just focusing on one. And not only doing direct instruction and going over these with my students, but then also modeling it, right? We know modeling it and students seeing us model those specific areas is more powerful than sometimes the direct instruction itself. Okay, so the next ring comes with classrooms. So again, what is the direct instruction that I'm doing to support my students? Then the school circle. Are they hearing this throughout their day? Not just from me, but from other adults that they come in contact with, right? At the middle and high school level, are they hearing that same language from all of their teachers, right? Are they hearing it from their principals? Are they hearing it from the AP, the counselors, right? Where are we at a school site and supporting our students with SEL instruction, and are we using that same language to support them? And then finally, home and community. So how are we partnering with our families and community members to really build out the social and emotional development of our students? So again, just things to think about when you are looking at applying your social and emotional instruction within your classroom. So here's just a few tips for supporting students, right? Explicitly teach these strategies and model them. Read and discuss current events, right? They're seeing the news, they're reading it, and at every grade level, bringing up age-appropriate things that are happening with the current events, so you can get those deep discussions going and realizing how they might be affecting your students. And then finally, design projects where students are helping others. We know that when students are feeling anxiety or depression, sometimes helping others can help fill that bucket and switch some of that, take some of that anxiety, depression off their plates, because they're focused on helping others, and that's helping them feel good about themselves. So we're going to dive a little deeper into SEL instruction and looking at resources. So the first thing we attached here was an SEL choice board. So what you could do is you could put this out for your students. It works at all levels, and just say, okay, we're going to make bingo for calming and connections. Here are the strategies. Once you get bingo, you can have some sort of celebration in your classroom or discuss specific strategies within the choice board that really worked for students. We added some daily SEL activities, slide decks for grades 3 to 5 and K to 2. If you click on that resource, it will take you to 10 days worth of explicit instruction that you can start using in your classroom. We're going to go now over 2 different sites where you can get lessons from. So the first one we're going to go over is Common Sense. So if you go to Common Sense Media and go into the Common Sense Education, again, this is where we get our digital citizenship lessons from. They also have an SEL component. So when you go into Common Sense for Education, again, click on the social emotional learning. When you scroll down, right, there are some professional articles for you to read. So just learning more about empathy and compassion through these articles. And then there are classroom ready resources. The nice thing about these resources is they give you lesson plan grade levels. So if I am a 5th grade teacher, I'm going to go to the 3-5. If I'm a 6-8 or a 9-12, I have these buckets where I can go to find developmentally appropriate SEL lessons that will provide direct instruction for my students. Again, not to say that you couldn't look at the other lessons for the other grade levels and modify them to meet the needs of your students, but this is just an excellent resource for you to have in your back pocket to provide additional SEL instruction. The next component we're going to talk about in terms of explicit instruction is Thrively. So all PUSD teachers and students have Thrively accounts. So if you go into My Plan, you'll see the Thrively button. You're already registered. You'll just log in with your Google ID, your PUSD Google ID, and you will be connected to Thrively resources. Now, your students eventually will be rostered in there at the start of the school year, so you can assign them lessons within Thrively. Okay. So if I go to the side over here, you can see that I have all these different options. I have playlists, lessons, pathways, sparks, projects, and activities. We are not going to dive deep into those. At the end of this slide deck, I will be adding a Getting Started with Thrively video that you can watch after this webinar if you're interested in getting started and how you can maximize your use out of Thrively. So for right now, I'm going to focus on 2 areas within Thrively. So the first one is the playlist feature. So if I click on playlist and I search SEL, what's going to come up are playlists that are already developed for students that include SEL instruction. So I can see I have a daily dose of SEL. So I can assign that to students. So every day when they come in, they would have a 10-minute daily dose of SEL lessons already done. And then I have an SEL for upper elementary and SEL middle to high school. Now, the only thing I will caution you about Thrively, I absolutely love it, but if you are a lower grade teacher, a lot of it is text rich. So a lot of these lessons you'll be needing to lead whole class. So technically the age that they start at is age 8. You can use this in lower elementary. Again, you'll just be driving the lessons rather than having your students do them independently. So if I click on the SEL middle to high school, I can scroll down and you can see there are all these lessons in here for students to go through, right? Self-control, gratitude makes you happier, no excuses, a story of perseverance. So they can work through those. So maybe on your weekly playlist, you could say, okay, you know, every day I want you to choose one Thrively lesson in the SEL component to go over. Or you could say, okay, today all of us are going to do the key to happiness and then discuss it as a group. Really just depends on how you want to use it within your classroom. So all of these lessons are already in here in a playlist for your students. Now, if I didn't want to have a big playlist and I felt like it would overwhelm my students having all of those SEL lessons at once, and I wanted to do it in a more structured format, I can come to the side and click on lessons. And then once again, I can filter by categories. So I can say, okay, I really want to focus on social emotional learning. Now there are other categories in here. So I can say, okay, I want to focus on critical thinking, leadership development, mindfulness, all of those pop up. But for right now, I'm going to focus on the social emotional learning piece. I can now filter by grade level. Am I primary? Am I upper elementary? Am I middle or am I high school? So I'm going to click on middle for right now. And then I'm going to search my lessons by SEL again, even though I already filtered it down. And up pops these lessons. So here I can say, okay, I really want to talk about social media. I know, especially in this virtual environment where students aren't having those connections with their friends, they're relying heavily on social media. And that's a discussion I want to have. So I can go into this lesson. I can then assign it to students.
Amy, a quick question for you.
Yep.
I know this one says it's about 30 minutes. Do you know off the top of your head how long on average the lessons usually are?
They vary. Usually it's about 20 to 30 minutes a lesson. Now, the reason they're that long is because the format is typically always the same. there's a video, and then there's activities for them to follow afterwards. So what you could do is say, you said, okay, I only have, let's see, how long is this video? Of course, it's not popping up. So say this video is 5 minutes long, and you really only have, 15 minutes to talk about life with social media. You could have them watch the video, and then instead of doing these activities within Thrively, you could do it as a whole group discussion. So that would be my suggestion if you are wanting to kind of change the time allotted, or if you're just wanting students to respond in a whole class manner rather than using the Thrively journal piece.
And I apologize if you've said this already. I've been reading the chat. Can you share a little bit about the strengths assessment that students take?
Yep. So one thing that Thrively also offers is a strengths assessment. So again, they're working on developing one for lower elementary students, but right now we start at age 8 all the way to high school. They can complete a strengths assessment, and what it does is it really identifies the student's strengths. So are they really focused on restorative justice? Are they passionate about animals? So it's a assessment that was designed by what is it? I think it was neurologists and pediatric doctors to really narrow down students' strengths. So it will give the students their top, I think it's their 4 strengths, and then you can really leverage that information and build upon it. So here's some of your strengths and your passions. How would you like to apply that to some of your learning? Or if you're working on, if you're doing projects within the classroom, you can leverage that and give students, a rubric and outline of here's the learning I expect. Now, which one of these areas do you want to explore deeper based on your passions? And again, Thrively in here, when you go, when you start playing around in it, you can go to different pathways and provide pathways to students based on their strengths and interests. But it will show you, once they do the strengths assessment, where your class lies. So you can then get a class overview and say, okay, my class is very verbal, right? So you're probably going to be having a lot more discussions than if you had a nonverbal class, or vice versa. If you have a class that's nonverbal, you're going to really focus on giving them strategies to feel more comfortable in public speaking and sharing their opinions. So those are some of the features that Thrively offers. And again, we do have district-wide accounts. So that if you go in as a teacher and you want to start playing with it before your students are rostered, it's there for you. You just click it and find it in My Plan. Again, I will be adding some videos after this webinar to the end that kind of gives you an overview of how to dive deeper within to Thrively. Lauren, any other questions regarding those Common Sense or Thrively or anything else we've gone over that we can address whole group?
So just going over what students can view and what teachers can view. So students only have access to their assessment, so they not necessarily see another student's strength.
Yep.
So it's private to them. So that's important to share in the beginning too, that don't pick what your friends like, pick what you actually like or are interested in. And also the teacher can view to see what her class, his or her class, is comprised of. So maybe you have a class one year that's super into animals, and then you can learn your classroom's interest or see what groups of students are passionate about certain things. So again, students can't see each other's things, but you can kind of see that. You can't see their individual questions and answers, just the overall assessment or things that they've completed. So you can't see question by question what they've done, but you can see tasks they've completed and their overall profile from their assessment.
Yes, another thing that Thrively will do is when the strengths and interest report is run on each student, it will then give them individual pathways. So it will say, oh, we've noticed that you are very interested in political science. Here's some other videos that show you, like, here's the everyday work life of somebody who is interested in that same area. And it will give them different videos to watch where they can dive deeper into their interests. So if we go back, Now we will move on to just some ideas around reflective activities.
All right. Thank you, Amy. So this one is super relevant to this time. We know that research shows when students are reflecting on their learning, they can better tap into their metacognitive processes and help better in their academic activities. So how can we get students to really reflect and process on this time? The School Psychologists Association recommended that we talk with children about what they're going through, right? This is a very difficult time for adults, so we can only imagine how students are feeling with this unusual way to attend school, not being able to see friends or family possibly. So how do we help them process this? And also know that they're not alone with this. Let them hear from their peers that they're probably feeling in very similar ways. One great website that can help foster this is futureme.com. That's all one word, futureme.com. Regardless of the current situation that we're in, it's a wonderful website where students can write a letter to their future self and then decide when they want it delivered to them. I had my teacher in high school do this with me. Senior year, we wrote a letter and he physically mailed it before this website existed to me at the end of my freshman year. And I found it such a powerful activity. And even just writing to your future self was like very cathartic and a way to kind of really process what was going on in these different times of our lives. So that's a great and private website to do that. So you wouldn't necessarily see what they do, but it's kept to themselves. We can also have students tap into that. This might be a primary source document one day, right? In social studies and science, we have students read primary documents from the past and realize how powerful these documents are, and that they could very much have students in the future be reading what they wrote in their COVID-19 journal. So that place-based learning is super beneficial for students to document these historic times and really kind of process what's happening in their lives. All right, this next one is peer-to-peer connections. So in the very beginning, I talked about structured student connections, right? Maybe posting a question on Flipgrid saying, tell me your favorite food to eat and why, right? That very structured discussion board, structured Flipgrid, but we can also think about how we can make this unstructured, right? We might just leave some things open for students to discuss on their own. So I might have a Flipgrid open where students can, and again, addressing digital citizenship, discuss things and have that chat time with their peers. I might leave an open discussion board where, again, I'm moderating it. I'm setting students up for success with digital citizenship lessons, but maybe an open space for them to talk about things that they would normally talk in line on the way to lunch or on the way to recess or while they're waiting for the next lesson to start, right? So giving those spaces for students to connect virtually is super powerful for them when they don't have a lot of that right now. All right, so this concludes the end of our webinar presentation. Again, if you have any questions specific to you, you can email the address on the slide. We'll be on this webinar for, let's see, it's 8:40, for about 10 more minutes or so to answer any questions that you might have. If you feel set and ready to go, feel free. You do not have to stay in the webinar. You can use the remainder of this hour for your work time. However, if you do have questions or you'd like to listen to other people's questions, feel free to stay in the chat. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate everything that you're doing and your commitment to students during this crazy time. Thank you for thinking about their social emotional well-being and building that community classroom, because we all know how important that is. So again, thank you for everything that you're doing.
Really quickly, just want to address some questions that are in the chat. I actually had to reach out to one of my former colleagues who works for Thrively to ask about the text read function, and there is one in Thrively. So there is a text-to-speech function available when you are in Thrively. And also when students are respond in Thrively, they do not need to just type it. There is a video camera option, so they could just hit record and then verbally record their responses to the activities within Thrively. Let's see. So the survey, I'm thinking, is for Thrively. When students go in there, one of their options will be a strengths assessment. So they would just click on the strengths assessment, and then the directions are very explicit when they're going through it. I've done it at many different grade levels, and so they just follow the directions, complete all the tasks, and then when you go to your roster, you'll be able to see which students have completed it, which ones have not, and then view their strength profile. Yes, I'm for middle school, I think, and high school, I think that is one of the differences from elementary, right? Is the students are having so many teachers throughout the day that you don't want them to have the same exact lesson in all periods. So I think a great idea is identifying, okay, is homeroom going to be responsible for the explicit teaching of the lessons, and then other grade levels or other teachers throughout the day are going to be just using that language and reinforcing that. So that goes again to that outer circle ring. How as a school are you supporting students in their social emotional learning? Yes, if you have given the strengths assessment, the students do not need to take it again the next year. You will, when they are transferred over to your roster, you'll be able to see their strengths assessment. So when you're looking